you been watching Mrs. Davis by any chance?
No, my wife has been working later, so
Mm,
TV time is limited.
yeah, it's worth a watch when you get a chance.
Oh, I know. We watched number one.
Yeah, well, every episode it becomes an entirely different program. It's really interesting.
Oh, that's kind of like that other one. Poker Face.
Yeah. Well, although the story it remains a single thread. The story is the story, but every time you think you've figured out any part of the story, it changes. It
Yeah.
changes.
Well,
Mm.
for a while anyway, until the writer's strike is over.
Well, there you go. But I think it's well worth a watch. It is very, very engaging.
What's the name of the show, T?
It's called Mrs. Davis.
Oh, Mrs. Davis, right.
Mm. And yeah, it's a very difficult show to kind of describe, but Linda and I are both enjoying it, and yeah, it's very well written, but you feel like it's written by people that have some real um, don't want to say some real interesting brains that need to be studied. So, because you're constantly going to go like, who thought of this? Who thought this up? It's like,
Yes, and why in the world would they do this?
right. Yeah, it's very, very interesting, but it does make you kind of, ponder what's going on in the mind of some of these people. So, but yeah. I don't know how there could ever be a second season of it. So I think you really are just watching a standalone event. But who knows? We've still got 2 episodes left to watch. They haven't been released yet. So we're at that point where we've kind of binge watched all the episodes that had been released. And now there's, I think, 2, maybe 3 episodes left. It's 10 episodes in total. And I think we just watched episode 8. Maybe it was episode 7. But anyway, well worth watching. Very interesting. But yeah, yeah.
Creativity in action. I read a book a long time ago by a film producer, Barnett Bain, and he wrote the book of doing and being. And his idea of creativity says all acts are creative acts.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he talks about this aspect of creative tension and how they create things in Hollywood, and it's fascinating. There was a movie where they actually followed people around, or the actors around, for 12 years, and that's how the movie played out. I forget the name of it, but that's fascinating, because imagine that. They could have died, they could have done anything in 12 years.
Yeah, I mean it's a very interesting thing to watch. And from a tension management perspective, obviously, if a program engages you sufficiently that you continue to watch it and commit yourself to following it through to the end, where on the change grid has that program put you? So,
Outgrade, yes.
well, there's a little bit of an outgrid because there's a drive to complete what's been started.
Right.
What else do you think keeps an audience's attention? Where does the audience need to be on the change grid, or where do you as writers need to maintain people on the change grid in order to get them to keep watching? And
So that's an engagement ring.
there's definitely, we can talk
Yeah.
about the engagement rings as far as this is all unfolding. So they've got to keep me well engaged, but there's this intention. So I think it's kind of like a little band around here. Obviously, the reason why Mrs. Davis is engaging is because the moment you think you figured something out, something new is brought to your attention, which kind of redefines everything you've watched up to that point. And so it's like, where do mysteries live on the change grid, up grid or down grid?
Yeah, definitely upgrade.
Definitely up grid. There's some puzzle that we're being presented with, and they're being very careful about what information to share, how to share it. And then they're relying upon us to interpret it in a particular way that may or may not match the way that they had intended for it to be interpreted, or they have various possible interpretations. All that to me is more of an upgrade kind of a thing. So because you want to stick with, you want to figure it out. There's a driver energy, and because you are being played with, if you will, at the very least, your emotions, thoughts, etc., are being exercised. There might even be a little bit of that expressive driver energy that is really what's keeping you compelled to watch it.
That's
So,
fascinating.
yeah, and maybe that's the formula for any kind of a successful mystery, any kind of a successful story. Because how many minutes will you guys give a brand new program before you kind of make the decision whether it's worth watching or it's time to skip it? You know, they bring up these things. If the pilot doesn't grab you, how many of you are willing to give it a second episode before you
No,
decide, whether you're going to watch it or not watch it?
no.
Yeah, Linda and I have probably got a 15-minute limit. We'll give anything 15 minutes. At the end of those 15 minutes, if it isn't interesting, engaging, well produced, well acted, well written, there's too many other things to choose from to, waste what little TV time we set aside on stuff that isn't really worth watching. So my thought is that if something either moves you way too far up grid, for example, how many of you were or are fans of the whole Yellowstone thing? Anybody, feel free to unmute if you're a fan of Yellowstone.
I haven't watched it, but I keep thinking I need to.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, you guys can certainly unmute and chime in what your personal experiences were, but we found the thing to be so, I don't know what the word is, on the edge of violent or whatever. So early on, we just went, I'm not going to watch this.
I only watched one episode to see the guy who played Rip Wheeler, because that's Cass Warner's son and that's Harry Warner's great-grandson.
And you thought that might bode well for the whole program, did it?
I just wanted to see how somebody from the community, a nepotism actor was going on.
Right. Yeah. Well,
So what did you think, Shags?
I didn't like it. I thought it
Mm.
just dragged on. It was like,
That's what I thought, is that it dragged on, and we thought, well, maybe we'll watch it a little bit longer because everybody was saying how good it was, but we just went, oh,
they must have drab, wretched lives.
yeah, we just don't get it.
like we just don't get it. And so in that particular case, you might leave it because it moved you too far downgrade too quickly.
Mm.
And so you lost interest in it, and you thought that your analysis might not have figured it out, but your analysis was that this is not for me. And so you just said, that's enough, I'm done, moving on. There are other things that could be so disruptive, so shocking right out of the gate that you just go, I don't need to be watching this kind of violence or this kind of weirdness or whatever. So did it freak you out, so you abandoned it, or did it bore you, so you abandoned it?
Gee,
So,
I feel so disconnected from this conversation because I know nothing about any of these shows. I haven't watched TV in
yeah.
probably 6 years.
Well, there you go. Well, then I will say to you that you have successfully avoided a whole bunch of garbage, but you have missed out on a few really good things.
I probably have.
Yeah, so there's some really good stuff worth watching, well developed. So, for example, right now we're watching the final season of Mrs. Maisel. Don't know if any of you are fans of Mrs. Maisel.
Yes, that's been
This-
fun.
Yeah, this is an Amazon production, and we can tell you from the very beginning that the writing has been stellar. The performances of the actors are so impressive, just that they can deliver their lines so quickly, and so it's just amazing to watch this dynamic unfold.
And I
So
think sometimes we continue to watch it, not only because the story is very, very good, but because, like T said, you just can't believe that these actors are so impressive, delivering these lines that make you laugh, it's just amazing.
And
yeah,
the costuming is incredible.
costuming is incredible. Linda was saying that if she could just have Mrs. Maisel's wardrobe, that
Her
wardrobe,
mother's wardrobe.
oh my God, it's amazing. It's just
Yeah,
amazing.
it is.
So that is something that's certainly worth checking out for an episode or so. But my point is that successful television, successful plays, etc., are also a demonstration of tension management. So if it does a good job of managing your tension, you're going to stay engaged, you're going to feel compelled to commit yourself to continue to watch it, etc. Maybe it's something that you're watching because it relaxes you, like perhaps a good situation comedy does. Get you chuckling, it's all funny. There's no big puzzle to figure out, but it's interesting enough that you go, yeah, that's enjoyable. That's a nice little escape. And then other things like mysteries, any kind of dramas or whatever, you're going like, no, this is stimulating. This is really something to figure out, something to really do that. And people who like documentaries may very well just be along the heart line of power because they're learning something that they wanted to know. They're getting answers to questions they've never even asked, but nevertheless, that's kind of keeping them on that. Here's the logic, here's the facts, here's the story behind it. So they're not trying to captivate you with mysteries. They're not trying to, engage you through humor. They're going like, no, let's get engaged in the subject matter that's really at hand. So when I think of dramas versus documentaries versus comedies, I can see how they play out on the change grid and why they're successful or not successful.
This is interesting to me because I always wondered about, everything is tension management. So like the merging, if you will, of like this personal aspects of what you bring to the moment of, wanting to learn from a documentary or that kind of thing. We talk about like the alphas and those kinds of things. You have the social forces, the hierarchical forces, but
Yes.
then there's something personally that's driving you as well. So
Mhm.
you have this kind of merging of forces to reconcile in the moment. It's quite fascinating.
It certainly is. And you can look at all the other types of entertainment and see if the same thing holds true. Like we're not big on reality TV, although I do like the occasional cooking competition sort of a thing. But reality TV is kind of pulling you more upgrade into the drama of the lives of the people that they've chosen to be involved in whatever that I don't know, Amazing Race or Survivor, or what version are you up to when it comes to Kardashians and all that sort of a thing? I've never watched much of those programs, but I'm sure
The
they're
Who?
engaging because it pulls you into other people's dramas.
The Who?
Mm.
The Who? The Kardashians into you. In fact, I saw a very interesting
Is
meme.
that a new car line?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. I saw a very fun little meme a few days ago where it had Kim Kardashian and she was sitting at a poker table, and
Yes.
the little thing said, "The next time you think you're a moron or whatever, just remember this photograph of Kim Kardashian playing poker while wearing reflective
Yes,
sunglasses,
mirrored glasses.
mirrored glass." Yeah, there.
Wow.
Anywho, so but we get that, and I've shared with
Dum, dum, dum.
yeah, there it is. I've shared this with you guys and even put it up on our Facebook page. But do you remember when Hamilton was being presented on TV? And so we thought, all right, we'll watch Hamilton. Obviously, it's been a profoundly successful Broadway play, etc. Let's watch this. We couldn't make it through 15 minutes of it, 20 minutes of it. And so I went to Facebook and I said, I simply don't understand the hype. Unfriend me if you must, but I just don't get it. And so, but I'm also someone who has never enjoyed a musical. So, it's more about me than it is about it. But nevertheless, it's still tension management. Can we get enough of an audience to stay connected long enough that we are able to make whatever money we wanted to make, perhaps, or tell the story we wanted to tell, whatever it is, we have to engage the audience. If we can't, then the audience is either going to slip down grid where they're going to fizzle out, or if we're doing something that's a little bit too provocative, too whatever, we're going to move them too far up grid where they're going to escape it because, it's awakening feelings that aren't really helpful to them or useful to them.
Interesting.
Yeah. And other genres, by the way, what about horror movies? What about the whole Halloween kind of series? Now you've got a group of viewers who are basically putting a burden on you as the writers and the actors, the directors, to scare the living daylights out of them. And if your movie doesn't move them far enough upgrade, it doesn't, what I want to say, trigger the release of all these endorphins and all that sort of stuff, they're going to basically, give you bad reviews, and no one's going to come and watch your horror movie. So yeah. All right. Anyway, well, not the subject for today's call, but anytime you want to talk about how entertainment and the change grid works, I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah. So, well, we're already deep in the call, and I haven't even started to identify it. So this will be one of those weird starts. But last conversation we had, we were talking about this whole Greek alphabet and personality typing. And so one of the questions, I believe it was Kathy, or was it T, that brought up about percentages of the population that fall into the different categories.
Yeah, it was T.
Yeah, it was T. Yeah. And so I ended up doing a little bit more research to find out, and I did learn some more information about this whole alpha beta kind of thing. Apparently, the first, want to say, documented mention of it in personality typing that I was able to find just goes back to the 1980s. Isn't that terrible to say it just goes back to the 1980s? That was 43 years ago. Oh, how old are we? But so it was something that was brought up in the 80s. There were a lot of interesting things that were brought up in the 80s, but just keep in mind, the 80s was internet. So there wasn't an internet, there wasn't social media, there wasn't Reddit, there wasn't whatever those kind of forums might have been. I don't know what year those things all started, but I'm going to believe it was not during the early 80s at the very least. Anyone know when AOL became a thing? Was it in the late 80s or?
I think the late 80s, I
Okay, Google it.
think.
Yeah,
Okay.
sometime in the 80s, because I remember when the AOL Time Warner merger was happening, it was in the 90s. So
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me ask Siri real quick. Hey Siri, what year did AOL start? Oh, good grief. Hey Siri, what year did AOL start?
Here's an answer from
1983.
Wikipedia. AOL began in 1983 as a short-lived venture called...
Yeah, but that's when it started, but it didn't become popularized until later in the 80s. So anyway, point is, when this model was being, originally proposed, it wasn't being proposed in some way that it could garner international attention, let alone, any kind of widespread acceptance or whatever. But just with that, someone would have had to write a book, and the book would have had to be published, and blah, 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 blah. So it kind of fell into the recesses, and then it got resurrected by a handful of people who wanted to produce YouTube videos. And so they're always trying to find subject matter that they can create some content around that'll get them the views they're looking for. And so this is where you would see this this current resurgence of alphas, gammas, deltas, etc. So pop psychology at the very best, perhaps. That being said, in the animal kingdom, it has been studied more specifically, but generally, even in the animal kingdom, it just says there are certain species that form communities, and in those communities, some alpha is going to arise, and you can watch other animals in the collective fight that alpha for the alpha position. But that all has to go back to mating. So the alpha male, at least in theory, can have his pick of whichever females he might want, and somehow or another, that can become something to fight about or whatever. So I know that part is real. We've watched that in a lot of different animal behavior, but they brought it into the human domain for their content generating Motivations. Thoughts about that? people are always looking for content. They're trying to find some way to distinguish their channel.
Yeah, I can see that happening in terms of how a lot of these constructs kind of arise and become popular.
Yep.
Because even some of the African cultures, I remember growing up, they still some African cultures that the alpha male is the one. That's where that it takes a village come from. Like he was responsible for the whole village, and he had wives throughout the whole village, kind of a thing. And some, tribes still believe in that.
Well, sure. There's a hierarchy. Even if we look at the caste system in India, isn't that kind of it's still an
Exactly.
organizing principle.
Yeah.
And in that organizing principle, certain groups or certain individuals inside of a group are going to have greater levels of authority and power bestowed upon them. And sooner or later, that pattern repeated long enough, it becomes traditional. It becomes part of the fabric of the way that particular society operates. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Kathy has the background in anthropology. So Kathy, have you spent much time talking about or learning about tribal arrangements?
Well, yeah, many years ago, and I sort of stay in touch in a nominal kind of way. What was the specific question you wanted to ask about it?
Yeah, the question is really, have you seen these hierarchies present in other cultural groups?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's hierarchy in every society.
Mhm.
It's really a question of how flat it is, where the gradations are, but every society has a hierarchy in some fashion.
Mhm.
Even those who, some Native American cultures say they don't really have an hierarchy, but there is always a chief or a leader type figure, and so there's a nominal, there is a hierarchy, even if it's due to influence and knowledge
Mhm.
versus formal permanent authority, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yep.
But yeah, no, hierarchy exists everywhere. And it's just the nature of I mean, it exists in animal life, it exists in human life. So it's just a
And so
question of how form it
would you
takes.
say that it's fair to say that in modern life, that any one individual could actually be part of multiple hierarchies?
No, absolutely. We all are.
Right, whether we chose to or not, I guess, we kind of
Yeah, yeah.
default into it.
We all are. I mean, we're all part of different networks too. The network organization and approach is much more common now. But yeah, we're all members of different hierarchies.
Yeah. And so that brings up the question, why are hierarchies viewed as being useful? What are the positive aspects of a hierarchy? And what might then be the flip side of that? What are the negative aspects of a hierarchy? So whatever label we're going to give to a particular culture or whatever the tribe or whatever it might be, someone's going to rise to the point of alpha, whether they do that through force or they do that through being elected or they do that because of tradition, I don't know, but someone's going to end up being that alpha. And I'm going to believe that that alpha may periodically be challenged by others who wish to become the alpha. Maybe that's a beta that did it. Maybe that's another alpha who's simply willing to fight. So thoughts about how the hierarchies might actually be a
I
useful
think it
positive
depends on the
thing.
culture, T. I've been reading a book by oh, who wrote Seven Habits? Stephen Covey's son, called Trust and Inspire. And they make a distinction between the command and control leadership culture and a trust and inspire leadership culture. So I think those two different cultures would have two different alphas.
I would agree. And those alphas might, on the surface, look to be different, but there would be other characteristics in both of them that would be consistent. So that's what we're talking about. What are the positive aspects of the alpha energy?
You, you,
Yeah, the positive aspects are simply there's a certain level of stability and order that people can depend on. That decisions, the manner in which decisions are made is predictable. You know, there are usually clear characteristics or competencies required for specific roles that take place. So it's the kind of stability, predictability, foundational aspects of hierarchy that I think people appreciate.
I
And
think
go
there's
ahead,
one
T.
more thing. Oh yeah, there's one more thing, and that is when you're onboarding or bringing other people on, you want to know kind of where the influencers, the decision makers and stuff. And that can actually jumpstart somebody into assimilating into an organization.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, in a well-structured hierarchy that's, let's just say, being driven by more noble motivations than self-serving motivations, maybe it gives people more of a sense of security. So we go back to your earliest learnings in tension management. I said that that we're constantly involved in the change process. We're always looking at the world around us to find out if we're four things. Do you remember what those four things are?
Happy, healthy.
Safe, secure, happy, healthy.
Safe, secure, happy,
Happy,
and
healthy.
healthy. Well, if the hierarchy helps me feel more safe, more secure, more happy, and more healthy, not necessarily physical health, but health as far as our community is concerned, then we might say we are part of a very good functioning society. Or culture or country or whatever the label happens to be that we're going to give to that organization within which this hierarchy exists. Yeah, is that fair to say? So there's a positive side to a hierarchy. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably those same things that, in terms of conformity, that makes it a challenge, you know, because that one size fits all, as you start to add demographics and they start to see things from their perspective differently, then they start to challenge those constraints, if you will, of that. And I see that happening now with the younger generation, right? Look at what's happening in Iraq and different places like that, where the regimes have been in place for over 80 years. Same thing happening in South Africa. I've always had a challenge and been got into heap of trouble for challenging I call them constraints, just because you weren't allowed to ask questions. And that's, I always push back against that kind of dynamic, even in the family holdings business, right? My father passed. You have to negotiate by law with all the male heads in the family. So all of these uncles who don't want to have anything to do with the business, but you have to negotiate with them as to what to do with this business. That just makes no sense to me.
Right, but that's the way it was structured. And so
exactly.
Now we can talk about, when do hierarchies stop being useful to people? Now, I'll throw one thing out. Do you think that the people who are leading ineffective hierarchies are further upgrade, outgrid, downgrid, or ingrid? Where do you think, first of all, where do you think a good leader of a good hierarchy needs to be on the change grid, and what happens if they're elsewhere?
Well, they need to be outgrid, you know, not in the danger zone, but they need to be in power. And outgrid. I think ineffective leaders of hierarchy are either downgrid or upgrid.
Downgrid, upgrid, and I'm going to throw in there, what happens if they move too far outgrid? Do we now have an ineffective?
Become despots,
Right.
you know.
And so I think you're right. If that that leader of that hierarchy, which I will say resonates with the alpha energy on a good day, if they are thrown out of sorts, or they start to lose interest, or they decide to become emboldened or whatever, we're going to watch the effectiveness of that hierarchy suffer. And ultimately, well, it's going to be called into question whether or not the hierarchy is still serving the greater good. Remember that the person who is plotting at 1010 has three energies. What are the three energies that they're there? What words describes that location at 10?
So the driver.
They are a driver in all capital letters. What else are they?
Driver, amiable.
They're a driver with one capital letter, and they're an amiable in all lowercase. So they are an amiable driven driver. If we take that amiable piece away from them, and replace it with an expressive tertiary energy or an analytical tertiary energy or another dose of driver in the tertiary energy. I guess the easy way to throw this to you guys is what happens if a leader of an effective hierarchy loses sight of the people, loses sight of the
they start to block and control communications.
And so now what happens? What happens? Because now the hierarchy, we're saying the hierarchy is now starting to show some issues. Maybe if it's showing issues long enough, it starts to become noticeably ineffective. What now happens to that alpha?
They get replaced.
They're going to get replaced. Now, if everyone is downgrid about that alpha's behavior, or everyone is terrified and upgrade about that alpha's behavior, what's the likelihood of the alpha losing their position and power?
High.
Well, let's look at that again. If they are able to keep you upgrid or keep you downgrid, what?
Oh yeah, they'll stay in power.
And why is that? So let's think about this. You can apply this to the way governments operate and all that kind of stuff. How does it serve the leader of a hierarchy in that kind of a situation if they can keep the entire population up in stress?
Well,
fear is one thing, and unwillingness to do anything or knowing what to do.
Right. So there's fear that's all happening. David, what were you adding to that?
They're the only one left in control.
They're the only one left in control. This is why I told you about watching this wonderful YouTube channel about this couple who came from, I'm hearing all this background noise for you guys to see them, that they're from Cuba, and the Cubans are terrified to try to do anything to step up and overthrow the government, because what are they convinced is going to happen to them if they even start to make rumbles about it?
Yeah.
You know, and maybe the same thing's happening in Russia and some other kinds of countries as well. But if I remove people's ability to defend themselves, then they're going to be up in stress and nothing they can do about it. Nothing they can, because they feel like they are in harm's way, and they may very well be. On the other hand, if the alpha leader of that hierarchy is so strong that they've convinced you that everything is okay, that your basic needs are being met, or whatever, are you likely to allow them to continue, or are you going to disrupt that?
Yeah, that's your disrupt.
What's that now?
You'll disrupt that.
Will you? You're feeling just fine. Everything's totally
Oh
cool.
yeah.
You'll leave it in place.
Yeah, you leave that in place.
Yeah. And now someone comes along and challenges the alpha. And they too, maybe they were a beta, maybe they're just someone else who's challenging the alpha, probably another alpha. Who's going to defend the incumbent alpha?
Those people who feel safe with the incumbent alpha.
Well, safe with the incumbent alpha. There's also a possibility that the people are so terrified of becoming associated with the attacking alpha that, because if the incumbent survives, then they know that wrath or whatever is going to come towards them. They might also try to stop the challenging alpha.
In some cases, it's almost as though they become numb and they're fearful of doing anything. And so that it's just, They don't realize that it's easier to do nothing. They just think it's the right thing to do.
Right. And so if I really want to overthrow the despot, I think that's how you described it, Kathy. You want to overthrow the despot, who's going to be able to do that? Is it the people that are downgrid, the people that are upgrade? Who's going to overthrow that existing government?
Have to come, I don't know, it might have to come from the outside.
Might have come from the outside, or, you know, oftentimes, particularly if you're watching movies, there's a resistance movement, and the resistance movement has its own alpha. It's out there trying to influence things, and so they tend to operate more on the. They tend to be driven. Oh, no, sorry, they tend to be driven, amiable drivers. So think about that, or maybe even a balanced driver. They're coming along, trying as best they can to say there is another way, there is a better way. But in order for us to succeed, we're going to either have to, now assume for a moment it's a democracy, we're going to have to present our position and win sufficient people over to our way of thinking so that when voting time comes along, we've got enough of a population that we can overcome whatever the incumbent happens to be. That might be how a democracy works, or at least it's supposed to work that way. In the case of where something is more of an authoritative kind of a setting, it may very well be that the people who are going to overthrow it have to be people who can somehow or another exercise control over the military. So whoever these people upgrade are afraid of, if the people that are upgrade recognize, no, those people that would be delivering the punishment are actually now on our side. Now what happens to the people that only have sticks and stones to defend themselves with? What do they start doing with their sticks and stones? They know they've got the military behind them. It's trying to fight this situation. They know they've got that. What are they going to do to whatever degree they possibly can? Think about this. They're going to join in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, we've all watched Les Mis, right? So the whole story of the French Revolution is what I've just described. So once they knew that there was some actual substantial defensive and offensive power to go after the ruling class, it was amazing how many people became willing to start throwing sticks and stones.
Interesting.
So
So where's the how does common ground fit into this when you have the systems that have too many alphas? You know, seems like many societies around the world are in that predicament where there's too many outdriven, too many extremes, and not enough of the common ground, or at least to even be positioned for that. So how do you factor that into this here?
Well, because I think what you're talking about is more of a battle between it's not cultures. The word I'm looking for is philosophies about how to best manage a population and what the population needs. When I think about things like common ground, or Linda could talk to us extensively about braver angels, they're basically saying, like, you know, we can be a very effective collective if we will only come together, appreciate one another, regardless of what kind of a position we held beforehand, the willingness to participate in common ground, the willingness to participate in braver angels. These are where it all starts. But this is a very different philosophy than tends to govern hierarchical organizations. Without going too far back in history, remember that the battle between Socrates and Plato in their philosophical angles, most of society is based on the beliefs of Socrates. Where Aristotle came along and said, no. And perhaps the biggest one of their differences to look at is that Socrates believed that the uncontrolled human being was inherently dangerous. and needed to defer to an external authority in order for society to work. And Aristotle said, no, humans can only achieve their greatness when they are living individual lives, and controlling those individual lives is going to be damaging to society in the long run. We need to have that freedom of expression and thought and all the things that come along that ultimately resulted in an aristocracy. If you think about that, so don't think Aristotle is a particularly noble person, just had a different philosophy that the people needed to run it, not some external authority that was demanding our compliance. And so I think we have that. So when I think about common ground, I think Common Ground and Braver Angels have a very noble motive behind what's going on. But if that noble motive is going to sooner or later butt heads with the alpha who's in control of the current situation, what do you guys predict is going to happen? Cooperation, conflict, good, bad, right, wrong? What do you think?
Yeah, conflict.
Conflict, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, T, you just unmuted. What would you like to share there?
I did.
Oh, I thought you did. Sorry. So David, Brian, you guys are all unmuted.
No conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be a conflict. And now, again, in a democratic society, at least in principle, we should all be able to go to the voting booth and make whatever decision we want for whatever our future is going to look like. So if we have alphas that are becoming increasingly outgrid, we know that a democracy is going to give way to more of an authoritative kind of a thing, that whatever form it takes. But you know, what happens when you take this individual, and now they start to be more focused about their future, how they're going to survive, how they can amass more power, how they can do whatever. It's suddenly we're going back to kingdoms and that kind of a control. Well, we need the common ground. We need all the people to join forces and say, enough with all the emotion, enough with all the secondary motivations. We're together because we're trying to figure out how we as a society can best function as a society.
Right. And that's why I asked that question, because it seems like there's interplay. So take, for instance, being here in Nicaragua, right? So you have these old cultures. Family is a hierarchy, right? So the male, you know, there's machismo where the male is head of the home, or head of the family in terms of going out and, you know, providing for the family. But the mom runs the home. And so I look at these dynamics of when they like come to the physician, right? The male doesn't ask questions, the female does, right? On behalf of him. And you see all these different kinds of dynamics. And like when they go into the females go into the workforce, the conversations that we've been having is how they feel less than or put down or something because of the organizational hierarchy. So it seems like there's these interplays that are intertwined throughout, you know, daily experiences. So that's why I'm trying to think to myself, like the common ground to me seems to just be like to honor, as we say in South Africa and Zulu, you say sawubona, you're greeting someone's humanity.
Yes.
And you start there and work your way backwards.
Right. Now, here's where we, you know, again, look at a different layer of the change grid. Let's say the common ground, braver angels, all those things and similar things exist within inside of the green circle. How much actually changes inside of the green circle?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Sooner or later, what's happening inside of the green circle has to move out between the green and the red. This is where life is lived. This is where the changes are actually going to occur. And so how does that common ground body of knowledge and group of people now step up or step out, as we look at it on the change grid, to challenge, if we will, to confront, to battle is a bit of a strong word for common ground, but nevertheless, we have to do something to make sure that this alpha that is no longer serving us, who has lost their humanity or whatever, or forgotten who put them in place, whatever, realizes that they don't have a guaranteed future, that there is another force behind them. To
Mm.
connect this to other things we've talked about, it is this inside of the green circle kind of mindset and behavior set that ultimately pushes us up the spiral dynamic. And so evolution is being driven by this, but nothing changes until someone steps out and is willing to not just have strong intentions. So face it, if I look at what Common Ground really does, and I love Common Ground. I don't mind at all saying it's doing a very good job of creating awareness, mid-grid awareness about what's going on. So it's teaching people and training people and giving them skills and opportunities. And from that, they might even formulate this little band here, which are the intentions. They might have lots of very, very positive and beautiful intentions to go and do something. But unless those intentions are moved into action, moved into actual engagement, what's going to be the outcome?
Yeah, things that just remain the same.
Right. And so in our society, in most modern societies, the battle is fought in the at the ballot boxes. It's that's what it's really all about. So now, does the alpha want that battle to happen in the voting level?
No,
No, why not?
because that's a structural integrity. It'll start to dismantle the system by which they hold the power over, or control over.
Exactly, exactly. Now, again, if they are a good leader of a good hierarchy, they still have that amiable kind of thing, they might be against it because they're going like, wait, there's a lot of good things that you want to throw out the window, or there's a lot of progress that we've been made that blah, blah, blah. So that alpha, don't think for one moment that alpha is always self-serving and always, being in one of these outward behaviors. They may very well say that what they see coming their way is going to, in somehow or another, harm the very people that they've worked so hard to try to take care of. So that battle is going to occur. Battles have both, what I want to say, going back to Knights of the Round Table, they were out there fighting for the greater good, fighting for, there's a word I can't grab at the moment, but you have to think that both of these motivations could have a noble element going on behind them. And if we're going to have a battle of noble motives, well, that could be some really good discussions to have, couldn't it? If I
Yeah,
know that these Common Ground people, Braver Angel people, are all looking for the betterment of society, and I know that this alpha is also looking for the betterment of society, I would like to think that they can work together and figure some things out. And maybe that's how, a Congress should actually operate, or a parliament should actually operate.
right.
But if this one's too far out grid and they get challenged, now what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, that conversation won't happen.
It won't happen.
And it would be too much conflict for any good outcome to come out of it.
Right. And usually what happens, this is the dynamic to watch for, is the alpha now, or the outgrid danger zone, wants to attack the people who are part of the Common Ground movement, if you will, where the people that are in Common Ground aren't really all that interested in attacking this alpha as much as they're trying to educate the population, attack the ignorance, attack the misinformation, attack the whatever that the outgrid alpha is trying to impose or throw out there. So you can always tell anytime you go, let's look at the issues. The people on the Common Ground side of things, inside the green circle, are much better equipped to talk about issues, where the alpha is more interested in power and control.
Yeah,
Right?
I feel like a lot of what I'm doing right now, in fact, is that I call it selling the world frame. So where I'm offering, okay, yeah, you've gotten the tribe, so to speak, to this point, but let's look at and explore the possibilities of making things even better, right?
Mhm.
So and that becomes an interesting conversation because some of the pushback is about what's already in place. And we're like, okay, if we're talking about evidence-based, then let's look at what's working and what isn't working for the greater good of people, not for a select few. And let's use that as a value-centric kind of, let's start to formulate metrics based on that.
Yep.
And then, you get more pushback. And so this kind of dynamic of going back and forth with the alphas, it takes a lot of energy.
It takes a tremendous amount of energy. It's just because we're looking at the two different forces, and we've talked about this before in pride-based leadership, that there's a transformational energy and there's a transactional energy. So the transformational energy wants things to transform, to change. They want to evolve. They want to move forward. The transactional energy is kind of saying, at least in part, we have to control how fast that all happens. We have to factor in some matters of practicality. So they're trying to kind of constrain this growth. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes people want too much to change too dramatically, too quickly.
Yeah.
And so that alpha energy, or that constraining energy, that transactional energy, may not be saying you're wrong, stop it forever, it's not going to occur. They're going to say we've got to be more thoughtful of how this is all kind of playing out. So Linda, go right ahead. What would you like to share?
I just wanted to add just a little side note. Braver Angels is focused on taking people from any view, leaning any way, and bringing them together to find out how each other thinks and feels and who these people are, so that by the time they're done with a class or a weekend or a seminar or a debate, there's more understanding and people actually come together. So that's what they're trying to do. And I was reading, they send me emails about, what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. They've actually got a group now within Congress who are working with Congress on both sides of the aisle, and people of all different views coming together to try and understand each other and learn how to work with each other.
Right. And so what you've just described is they're trying to mobilize whatever it is that they've got going. It's not just enough to make sure the people who attend Braver Angels or attend Common Ground are able to better understand, appreciate, respect one another, learn from one another. At a certain point, they say, now that we have this, are we going to do something about it with it? Are we going to try to have some sort of impact? Are we going to get engaged in whatever the real work happens to be? And what you've just said is the answer is yes. That's what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's what we really are talking about here. Keep in mind, in fact, I'll throw it to you as a question. Do you think that evolution can be stopped?
No.
No.
No. And so sooner or later, we are going to evolve. We're going to evolve physically. We're going to evolve psychologically, spiritually. We're going to evolve. The worst that this transactional energy can do is slow things down, but it can't stop it. So sooner or later, forward-thinking people will always move forward, and backward-thinking people can only control that, and not only that, can only interfere with that for so long, and then they're going to be overpowered. So
I think that's where we are now. So I look at different things around the world. It seems like the calm before the storm.
Yeah,
I like to call it. Like it seems like things are so chaotic, but what you just described is sooner or later the transformation, the cross, that prefix, right? It has to occur. It's just going to.
It's going. Movement on the spiral is straightforward. So you're always going up, 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 up that spiral. The only variable is the speed with which it happens. So sooner or later, it's going to happen. By the way, this is playing itself out right now. We could open up any newspaper. We could see this playing itself out all around the world. So there's always going to be a group of people who are trying to move the society forward. And there's always going to be another group of people that are trying to slow that down or steer it in a different direction, try to hang on to the past instead of recognize that it is movement towards the future that's going to happen one way or another, sooner or later, no matter what you do. Now, even if we say, yeah, but what if someone comes along and becomes a supreme dictator? Well, there have been many dictators over the course of history in many countries. What's happened to the vast majority of those dictators sooner or later?
Gone.
Yeah, they got overthrown. Are there dictators in the world today? Certainly. Are they going to be there 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now? Maybe, but probably something will happen to over. If nothing else, they're going to die. They're not going to live that long. Who knows what's going to come and clean up the mess? Is it going to be another family member who's just going to pick up where the last one left off? I'm kind of thinking about North Korea, how that has become almost a dynasty yeah, but other places where you still have a democracy happening, maybe just maybe we can overcome these sorts of things.
I used to think about this as a young lad growing up and living in all these different countries. I always ask myself the question, I don't know how terribly difficult it is, it probably is, but like when you have one president come in, does some great things, or, move humanity to a certain point, like why don't the next president, I remember asking about this in primary school, why doesn't the next president come in and pick up where he or she left off and continue to move forward instead of dismantling everything? And then it's almost like you're starting from scratch again.
Yeah, it's probably because rather than having a society where most people are on the same page about what it is that we're all trying to accomplish, you end up with these camps forming. The people that are pushing for the change, the transformational people, are butting heads up against the transactional people. So forward movement with anything about delaying that or reverting to some other time in history or whatever the case may be.
I think also people become entrenched with there's different philosophies and approaches with each versus camp. And some people just kind of wait around until that person's out of office and they feel the right one comes in. But a lot of them just wait because there's nothing that's going to get them out of there. And I'm not talking about the hierarchy, the way up. I'm talking about the trenches.
Yeah.
So it takes a huge moment to change that trench.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's it. Keep in mind that trench, as you've characterized it, is about people falling into downgrid sorts of situations. So we're just going to continue doing what we've always done. It's been working okay. So it's going to take a lot to get us out of that track. And have things actually, remember we said change occurs two places. Outgrid changes are driven by internal factors. Upgrade changes are driven by external factors. So when I look at these omega, sigma, delta even energies, they do feel a little bit more conservative, although they might be presenting themselves as being very driven towards change, but they're trying to respond to an imbalance in these perceptions of challenge versus ability. They're trying to help people reduce or overcome the challenges by increasing their level of ability to do that. Where if we have the gamma energy, the beta energy, the alpha energy, these are more about trying to maintain status quo, trying to continue. The gammas don't have enough energy to bother with changing it. The betas want to be the alphas, and so they're going to support whatever the alpha is trying to do. So these are the energies, I think, of continuing the status quo. And omega, sigma, and delta are a little bit more challenging to what that status quo happens to be. Okay, has this been interesting? I don't know that we're going to change anything that we do in our practices as a result of this discussion, but I thought it would be an interesting thing to look at. Comments?
It is.
Yeah, thank you.
It's out there. It's really out there. So I guess the only big lesson to watch for is that nothing is going to change the fact that we are existing in hierarchical structures right now. Maybe 30 generations from now, that might change. But right now, we are in these hierarchical kinds of situations. let's do whatever we can do to identify the alphas who still have that amiable energy from the alphas who no longer do. Yeah, and proceed accordingly. Okay, final thoughts, comments?
Yeah, Kathleen, mute yourself.
Discussion, T.
Yes. Yes. Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll come up with a new topic for next time around. If you've got one, you do feel free to send me an email about it. But I'll come up with something fun for us to start talking about next time around. Final thoughts, comments?
Oh, it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dee.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Have a great weekend.
Bye for now.
Thank you.